I want to bring us back now to what we're going to talk a little bit about today. You have what you need, expanding the depth, breadth, and diversity of your audience. We are thrilled to have with us some of Indianapolis's finest, Indianapolis with an apostrophe, wonderful arts leaders. We want to say a special thank you to the folks that helped us put this panel together. Bill and the staff at Phoenix, of course, also Julie Goodman from the Indianapolis Arts Council, and Brian Payne from the Central Indiana Community Foundation. We're joined today by Charles Venable, by Tamara Winfrey Harris, by Joanna Taft, and by our own Reg Douglas, who is an NNPN board member, to have this discussion. Tamara, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. So for those of you who don't know me, I am the Vice President of Community Leadership and Effective Philanthropy at the Central Indiana Community Foundation. So we are certainly an arts funder. I came to CICF 4 years ago from the Eiteljorg Museum of American Indians and Western Art. And I am also an author and a writer. And so my interaction with arts and culture is usually from the literary side, and I focus primarily on race and gender. But as an arts funder, CICF, about a year and a half ago, we changed our mission. Our new mission is to mobilize people, ideas, and investments to make this a community where all individuals have equitable opportunity to reach their full potential, no matter place, race, or identity. And I thought it was important to share that because I think we need a baseline. I want us all to have an agreement or understand where each of us is coming from as we talk about what it means to have a deep and broad and diverse audience base. So as my first question, I would ask the panelists to define what their organizations or they personally, how you define a deep, broad, and diverse audience base. And please tell us anything we need to know about your organization to give that answer some context. Dr. Venable?
Oh, well, thank you very much. And thank you all for asking me to be here. It's a great honor. I'm sorry we're not all together here in Indianapolis, but we're glad technology can bring us together nonetheless. I am the CEO and director of Newfields, a place for nature and the arts. And we have been known, I think if you put up the first slide, just so people will see what we look like, since you're not in Indianapolis in person. We're a very old art museum. We have been around since 1883, and we have been on several sites throughout the city during our history. However, the site that we're on right now, we moved to in the early 1970s, and this is a current view of our main building, which is one of the largest art museum buildings in the United States. And this is what people have known us for a very long time. When I arrived 7 years ago and we started doing some surveying, people in the city really knew us only as an art museum, which wasn't bad, but the actual audience for an art museum is fairly narrow across all Americans in this country. It's about 10% of the Indianapolis population. And so I knew if we were going to grow, become more diverse, become more inclusive, we were going to have to reach out to broader audiences. And if you'll flip to the next slide, our campus actually, we believe, helps us, because you can see here, there's the big art museum complex sort of in the left center, but we have a 35-acre lake. We have miles of trails in our 100-acre sculpture and nature park on the top of that slide. We have a major historic home that you can see there, sort of in the upper mid-right. We have a 40-acre botanic garden, and we also own 2 other historic homes off-site. And in our main building, we have 2 theaters, and then we have also a 700-seat outdoor amphitheater. So we too are home to some performing arts organizations, and we do also our own series of performing arts in our theaters as well. So the diversity of our campus, we thought, was being very much overlooked because we branded ourselves only as an art museum for years, decades, literally over 100 years. And so we made the big decision to name the campus for the first time. So the Indianapolis Museum of Art is now at something called Newfields, a place for nature and the arts. And we have been able, therefore, to reach out to different segments of our community, many of which didn't know we had gardens and parks and trails, or that half of our campus is free all day, all year long, and other parts of the campus we ticket. So we are very interested in using all of our varied resources to make sure we actually can attract and serve a much more diverse population than we traditionally really have. Our average museum member is very, very traditional in terms of it's basically a Caucasian woman around age 60, highly educated, and that is pretty standard for most art museums in the United States. So we're really working hard through programming to diversify that audience and have had some success. And we're also have made sure that our strategic plan has evolved in order to keep up with our visions of being more representative of the city that we live in terms of audience. Our mission is to enrich lives through exceptional experiences with art and nature, and our core values of stewardship, inclusivity, service, and excellence. Inclusivity was made a core value about 2 years ago, and we are working on numbers of programs to try to not just have that be something we aspire to, but to have it be a reality at Newfield.
Thank you. Reginald Douglas.
Hi, everyone. I wish I was there in Indianapolis to hug and say hi and have a cocktail with everybody. It's so good to be here virtually. I am new to studio theater in Washington, D.C. I'm in my 4th month as the new Associate Artistic Director. And prior to that, I spent 5 years working at City Theater in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania as the artistic producer and a member as a core member theater of National New Play Network. Both organizations prioritize EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion as core values of the organizations, which to me provides a really exciting, firm foundation upon to think about community engagement. And I guess my answer to the question of like what makes it deep is when it's at the roots. And I'm really grateful to be an artist and administrator that's worked primarily at organizations, both studio and city, and my freelance writing career as well, at companies that it's a non-negotiable value that we think about the world we live in terms of race and gender and inclusion. And we're always looking at the work we make both on stage and off as vehicles for dialogue and connection.
Thank you. Joanna Taft.
Joanna, you're muted.
I'm going to try and share a screen, so let's see how that goes. So I run the Harrison Center in Indianapolis, and we are located in a historic church building downtown. We've been here 19 years. When we first started, we opened up all the extra rooms, regardless of size, shape, or smell, and some of them do smell, and we let artists in. So we have 36 artists here. We also operate 6 galleries that change art monthly, which is a lot of work. And early on, we realized that most of the people come in our first year, we realized that most of the people coming were white, and at the same time, our artists were also struggling with selling art and staying in Indy. And at the time, this building on the right of the slide, this is the old Indianapolis Museum of Art building, which is where Charles's institution was, which is right around the corner from us. And it had been an art school. After it had been a museum, it was an art school. And they announced that they were leaving that site. And it was a real challenge for our neighborhood. And so the Harrison Center had been hearing about, Brian Payne at the time was looking for the creative class. The mayor was looking for world-class citizens. I was looking for art patrons. And yet we all needed a diverse leadership, a new generation of diverse leaders for our city to be a world-class city. And so we decided to start a high school designed to grow these world-class citizens, or these art patrons that would lead our city in many ways. So we did that when the Harrison Center had 1.5 employees. It was absolutely crazy. We started them in the basement of the Harrison Center. And then that school grew to have 2 campuses and serves a population that's 45% minority and about 55% free and reduced lunch. Harrison Center population, our artists, we went from being all white artists to minority population of the artists in this building it's 30%, and our staff went from being all white to 25% minority. So we are still in baby steps, and I think that I would probably want to spend most of this time confessing to you, what I haven't figured out and the blind spots. Oh my goodness, every time I think I figured something out, I realized later I had the biggest blind spot. So I'm on a journey. We have an amazing, we produce a lot of place-based art, and we use the power of art to move people's hearts and to educate them, to stir them, to be a conscience. We also have a very robust internship program and very high, both minority and free and reduced lunch. And they do everything from vitality, I'll go back to that later. But anyway, so we have a very broad base. We also work with elderly people. We have a program in our building, Art Mix, which is a separate nonprofit that we partner with that serves people with disabilities and physical and emotional challenges. So we have a very, very broad group that we work with, but that's actually what makes our work so beautiful. We love, love, love all the folks we get to work with.
Thank you. So Joanna, I'd love to ask a follow-up question of you, and then, also Charles and Reg may want to jump in. You mentioned that, it's baby steps. You're at the beginning of your journey, and it sounds like, which is wonderful to hear, that all of you have the idea of diversity and inclusion enshrined in your missions, in your strategies, your values. But do you know where you're going? So what is your goal? What would it look like to be successful for your organization? So Joanna, you said you're very early on. Have you thought about what it'll look like if you get it right?
So I have 2 answers, and one is a micro answer and one is a macro answer. So the micro answer is, the more I've been involved with, education and neighborhood work and all the different fields the Art Center's partnered with, the more I've realized that we need to know and love our neighbors. When we know and love our neighbors, gentrification doesn't happen, because you don't throw away or push out what you know and love. When you know and love your stories, cultural gentrification doesn't happen. You don't erase the past. You don't erase history. And so we, at the micro level, we use the power of art to lift up, to elevate people that have been historically oppressed, and so that more people can hear their stories, and so that more people can be invited into those stories. So that's the micro level. At the macro level, because we need to be working in both areas, is that we have systemic problems. And when we started Heron High School, which was a charter school, which, by the way, I wasn't a charter school person. I was just trying to figure out how to grow a new generation of art patrons and world-class leaders, and that was a tool that was available. We started it to be diverse but have all the problems gone away? Is there a divide between the haves and the haves not in terms of academic performance? Yes. Now we thought we were going to fix all that. We had all the answers. So we have to, we have to change the water. And the kids are not going to be successful in an a cultural environment, even though Heron High School is amazing. we as a society have not gotten to where we have fixed the systems. And so my question for the Harrison Center is, how are we involved in that? Where are we involved in that? I mean, sometimes I want to fall on the floor because I don't know what to do. That it seems so hard. But you know, we have been able to leverage some of our programs to help with things like the gentrification, the tax. You know, our city councilman, Bob Vasily, worked with some state representatives and senators to advance the idea of protecting long-term residents. And that's been a slow process, and it's made some progress. But we were able to introduce that idea to the community through one of our art programs, and give voice to that idea, and help shepherd some people that were having a hard time with that idea, help shepherd them to understand why that's important. We believe art can change hearts, and our systems will not change unless hearts are changed. And so we use art to try to speak to people's hearts.
Thank you. Reg. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean, Dr. Venable.
Sorry, I just wanted to sort of echo Jana's comment about being on a journey, because I think we're all on a journey. And if if we once down the road somewhere, one could sit here, which I can, and say, we've got it down pat, it's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
The world just, the world changes, and then all of a sudden it's not perfect anymore, and you have to keep reinventing and experimenting over and over again. And I certainly can say for our organization that's been around an extremely long time, I mean, I'm certainly not the first CEO and director who said we'd love to attract a more diverse audience, we'd love to reach more people. When we went back and did analysis of our attendance over the last 30 years, it's not small, because Indianapolis has just under about 2 million people in it, and we get about 350,000 people a year. But we've been there for decades. So there hasn't been any real growth, and that audience was pretty homogeneous over all that time. But that doesn't mean there weren't experiments about let's do more diverse programming. But it didn't necessarily mean that the audience you thought you were doing it for showed up, because there were bigger systemic issues of, just the basic fact that more or less 75% of Americans of any color, background, race, religion, creed, sexual orientation do not participate in plays, museums, art and culture, you name it. So we're already working with the minority of the US population who we're trying to attract to our venues. And so we're trying to do, yes, we certainly want to have an audience that reflects the makeup of our local community better, and we're striving for that. But I also want all those people who haven't discovered art, but might, if they just knew we could welcome them and they knew what we do, also to participate at much, much higher numbers. And I'll just give you one brief sort of program that we're doing that will show you that we think it's a great program, but the initial thing that we did really was a failure, and we've been working on it for 4 years, trying over and over to get it to function the way we want to. We decided that we wanted to give away someday 50,000 free tickets to major events that we do. And those would be for things that we normally charge for, not for all the free things that we do. And so we distributed 50,000 tickets through the city in various ways. And guess who showed up with all those free tickets in hand? Our core users who have more access to more things. And so we just ended up with, I mean, this is an exaggeration, but we are amongst a bunch of theater people, so to be a little dramatic, we ended up with more sort of Caucasian women who could have bought all those tickets. And so we then said, well, that's not working. And we got together. Now we have 22 community partners who work in target neighborhoods, many of which are very close to us. They are our neighbors, rec centers, libraries, you name it. And we distribute those tickets to them because they actually know their clients, and they know their clients who fit the criteria for who we're trying to help and give access to. And currently we're able to give 12,000 away and actually get them into the right hands. And we think it's going to take about 3 years before we can build enough relationships with people who can get to the people we want, because we don't know them personally. They're not part of our audience. And so that we're seeing as a example of how we're doing things right, but it is hard work.
It is. I guess the thing that I'm challenged by is I don't have a want, I have a need. And I sit here as a Black person who's spent my entire life making arts, and we paid for our tickets. And so I just want to challenge a few assertions that I think I'm hearing, which is one, that diverse audiences equals poor, which is not true.
Totally right.
Audiences of different racial demographics come from all different economic backgrounds. And I think the same way that marketing directors love zip codes, there are certain zip codes marketing directors just ignore that we could be thinking about. So I just want to challenge the idea of what we want to, that one, new audiences or audiences of color or young audiences equals freebie. Because actually what I think we do in that moment is devalue all the amazing work that we do as artists. And I think we lose why. And I come back to the values and the mission of what we're trying to do here, which is like, I don't have a want to get audiences of color into the theater. It's a need. The playwright, Dominique Morisseau, wrote the play for her community, and you can come too. And I think that's the difference that I want to challenge all of us as arts leaders on this call and outside of, in the virtual world over there on the internet, to really think about, if it's your value and you're failing at it, you shouldn't be able to sleep at night. Values keep you up at night. Things, whims and programs and desires, you can ignore. But your failure, if it's your value and you're failing at it, it should be such a problem for everyone in your organization, from the lowest paid to the board members and the funders. That should be a problem. And we need to start admitting our failure. And that's how I think the journey doesn't get halted at, well, we tried it and it didn't work. And so I feel, particularly because as an artist and an administrator who's a Black person first and foremost, because when I leave this Zoom call and I walk outside, my title doesn't matter. In this country, my race comes first, for good or bad. That's the fact of the audiences we're trying to attract and the artists that we're employing and giving space and voice to. And if we don't acknowledge their humanity first, then we're never going to get them to want to take the free ticket or come buy it, because they're not going to feel welcomed. And I'm not challenging this at you directly, Dr. Charles. I'm thinking about what that means when I've heard so often the idea of, well, we wanted to do this thing and it didn't work, as opposed to, I need to do this thing. So I will change that budget. I will reroute where the money goes. Budgets speak values. And so if we say it's free, we're actually saying it doesn't matter. It doesn't have value. And so I just want to keep challenging these assertions that I feel we're saying a bit casually, particularly as we think about audiences of color in this moment. Because what we should have done before we started, and this is my apology, just take a moment of silence for the reality that the audiences that we're talking about are actually dealing with real life or death issues way beyond the matinee. And I'm dealing with them right now as an artist and an administrator. I'm a human who's watching people who look like me die and see that cycle repeated and repeated and repeated. And if the American government isn't stepping up, then how can the institutions and the artists step up instead? So all those things to me are all connected. And I don't know what the question was, but I just had to say that.
But I think that's important. And I'd like to talk about that for a while, because the reality is, at the root of this is authentic relationship. And I think we all know in the field of arts and culture, it is not true that if you build it, they will come. Doesn't matter if you give away a free ticket. It doesn't matter if you put on an exhibition or a play that is written by a Black or Latinx or LGBTQ playwright. If you have not built an authentic relationship with the people that you say you care about and you want to come in. So I'm interested, how do you build those relationships with communities of color and low-income communities and immigrants and individuals with disabilities? What is the work you're doing to build relationships? And when I say build relationships, I mean not just talking at them, but also listening to their authentic experience.
I think about all the time as a Black person who sits in a position of leadership, and sadly one of too few, quite frankly, in my opinion, is why do you want the relationship? And if you want to have a genuine relationship, who is the one representing your organization? Who is your organization? Organizations are boards and staffs and the artists that you employ. And so often we solve it with the people on the stage. But behind the scenes is an all-white design team and a white director and an all-white staff and an all-white board. And we go, why don't they feel that they belong here? Why don't they feel welcomed? And we spend so much time calling them they, instead of realizing that we need to become a we. And that we is going to require some shifts in who does the speaking and who does the inviting and why we want to invite them. So I think first and foremost, what is your staff like? What is your board like? Not just what is the programming. Who are you as an institution? And I remember your question now. This, Reg Douglas is committed to predominantly white nothing. So I may work, and I've spent my career working and directing and training at predominantly white institutions, but I believe, like Lorraine Hansberry, who's, oh, can't see her, she's up there on the wall actually. She says an artist's job is to imagine the world not just as it is, but as it could be. And so the world that I want to imagine is not predominantly white. It's multicultural. It is rooted in the experience of all of us feeling true equity and inclusion, which means we all have a seat at the table. And if that table can't fit, then we break it and make a new one. So I want to keep challenging us to think about who's inviting and where are we inviting them to? And are we really trying to make a new organization, or are we trying to fulfill the needs of slot 2 or this program? I'm interested in not doing what I call bad democratic politics. Women's play, gay play, Black play, Latinx play. We go to different churches and try to court votes. No, let's create holistic partnership and relationship, like you said. And that requires a reset of the power dynamics. Let's have a we, which means you're gonna have to say, you know what? For many centuries, we were wrong. And for many years, this institution was wrong. We have to admit failure in a good relationship. I may be single, but I know that.
Charles, Joanna?
I couldn't agree more. We have to look inward before we all can look outward in many, many ways. And one of the things at Newfields that we've struggled with, but we're really committed to say, you can't fail at not having a diverse board, for example. You just can't, because they're the ones who set policy, approve plans, hire and fire people like us. And for years, we have struggled with getting much diversity on our board of trustees. And so a couple of years ago, we said, well, while we keep working on that, we have to break through this traditional problem and structure. And so we actually created an additional board that has, in general, a much younger group of people on it. So we have board of trustees, now we have board of governors. And we've given them the role of really functioning as a community focus group for our creative team's ideas, so that we can get a diversity of viewpoints around how relevant are these things, and will they appeal to people, and are we welcoming enough, all those kind of things that you, Reginald, sort of went through. And we have the board of trustees, as of today, has like 8%, a low number of diversity, people of color on it, basically. We've managed to get this other board, which we're using to help us with programming primarily and to increase our networks in the community, is about 30%. And so in some ways, we're trying to almost grow our own leadership from within that looks different than the former leadership that's been around for, in our case, over a century there, by admitting that you eventually, we will be able to pull from this board, I think, wonderful folks who will become the trustees and have the fiduciary responsibility of the organization. And is it perfect? No, but it's changed the dynamic we have inside already.
Dr. Venable, do those two boards have the same level of power?
Well, the board of trustees have the fiduciary responsibility. I mean, legally, they're responsible. The other board, though, they now meet together half of their meetings, and those governors serve on every board committee we have, and they have basically equal power when it comes to electing people to the boards, to both of those boards. They both serve equally on our governance committee.
I think what you're getting at, Tammy, is equity and power. And I've spent my entire career working in nonprofit theaters where I've heard the argument of, we'll make a focus group of all these people of color, all these young people who we don't feel are ready yet. And I always go based on whose standards. And I continue to, I understand that it's not new, Dr. Charles, that idea of, make a programmatic committee that has some programmatic oversight, but they don't hire and fire executives, which is the biggest way to make a change in an organization, is who is leading the organization and how are we amplifying new voices and those of women and people of color. The people who hire that person and that person reports to, that's where the power sits. And I do think the power to change bylaws. Bylaws are an important thing for a nonprofit organization. And I said this to studio this morning as we wrestle with what do we do in response to the world around us. And our artistic director said, well, we've never done that. And I said, well, the world's never looked like this. The world's never looked like this, because sadly, that Time Magazine meme that's going around that's got all the years crossed out, but we didn't have social media then. I mean, we're in a different place than 2016 when President Trump was elected. It's a different world in 2020. We were never in this global pandemic with a virus we couldn't identify. So the world is different, yet we're using old school metrics to measure what change looks like. And the thing I get caught up on is those metrics say I'm 3/5 a person, so they don't work for me. I have to find new metrics that actually include me as a non-negotiable, not as an option. So I would encourage to keep rethinking what this secondary committee means. Actually, the power is where the change lies.
And it's not a programming committee. They ask they ask us to basically that be one of their functions. They get together as a board. They do get to vote on bylaw changes. So it's not that they're just a subsidiary committee. I mean, They have much more power than that.
Yeah. It's a sad reality for so many theater institutions, at least. I know it's different perhaps for the other arts, the multidisciplinary art field, but it's so often the case that there's the gala group, the gala ladies, and then the kids, the young people, the other table. And I think you relegate people to kids tables or Black people table with a focus group, and that's not what you're doing. It others. We can't deny the othering. Mm-hmm. And 1954 wasn't that good, so I'm trying to move past Brown v. Board into a new day that actually does center equity, not equality. Because equality doesn't work if we all accept that this world is not built on equality. We've got to get to equity, which is about power and sharing that power across demographics.
Joanna, I want you to be able to get in here. And how do you share power? How do you build relationships to those communities who are not your typical arts patron, who is a middle-aged white woman with post-secondary degree and a high household income?
So I could share a lot of stories, but my organization has, as I said, I could start off confessing and tell you all the things I've learned. When we were trying to do good things, we ended up gentrifying neighborhoods. So I'm a gentrifier. I have done that. When we started the high school, people just flocked in, to live in that neighborhood, and it attracted white families that had not lived in this neighborhood before. So I have been a part of gentrifying, and about 5 or 6 years ago, I kind of got to one of those points where I began to see some things differently than I had been before. And I began to wonder how could you revitalize a neighborhood without gentrifying it? And there's a neighborhood that is just, our next door neighbors just east of us, that was full of vacant lots. And I just knew that there were 99 residents, and I knew that the developers were gonna get there at some point. And so I wondered, what would happen if we tried to partner with that neighborhood to figure out how to preserve their story, how to preserve how to revitalize them without being pushed out. And so we started meeting with the neighbors to see if that was something they were interested in, and they were very much interested in partnering with us. And we, initially the neighbors were all, we interviewed them and we got kind of 60 common hopes and dreams for the future. And we had this great idea. The neighbors were always talking about the good old days. And for a half second, I thought, oh my goodness, we ought to do theater. We've never done theater before. And we should do a big reenactment. We should reenact the good old days. But as soon as those words came out of my mouth, I was like, that would be crazy. The good old days really weren't that good. We need to be acting out. I like the phrase that Reginald said. What did you say? What could be? Or we use.
Joanne, I should have admitted. See, if we were all together, this would be so different. Like, I have the same birthday as Oprah, so sometimes it just goes, girl. I don't even know what to say.
Well, so the phrase we use is a neighborhood that ought to be. And that's a neighborhood without systemic injustice. And that's a neighborhood where everyone is known and everyone is loved. Now, obviously, I have never seen anything like that in my life, right? I don't know how to do that. I've never seen that. And so we had this crazy idea that what would happen if we partnered, we're visual arts people, what would happen if we partnered with the theater people and the set designers could build the temporary houses on the vacant lots and the actors could act out the neighbors' hopes and dreams. And it was a crazy idea and it was very expensive, but we did it. And we did it with our neighbors and out of that, working with the neighbors and learning their stories and then bringing their stories to life and then inviting the community to come in and pre-enact with us. That first year was amazing, but I was never going to do it again because it was way too hard. And of course, my new friends put their hands on their hips and was like, nope, you're coming back. And so we've done it 3 times. And out of that project, we developed something called the Gratriarchs. And these are, instead of sharing a screen, these are long-term residents. So this is Miss Shirley. This is Miss Jimmy, and she'll be 103 in June. And we've had her 101st birthday with her and her 102nd birthday. Don't even think of giving her a cake. She's had too many cakes. She wants pecan pie now. So we have a total of 19 official Gratriarchs. This is Miss Terry. She wears purple every single day. This is the other Joanna, Miss Joanna. We're twins. And Miss Pearl, it took Miss Pearl 2 years before she'd smile at me, but now she smiles all the time. But anyway, so we started this program called the Gratriarchs. And the great thing about that is none of these neighbors would say that they're the greatest. They wouldn't say that. But what is so unique about them is that, first of all, they help write the story of their neighborhood, but they're not hoarders. They don't hoard the story to themselves. They invite people into the story. And there are so many people in this community that haven't been invited and need to be invited into their stories to understand where we are as a society and where we could be. So we do this big pre-enactment, and there's been a different emphasis every year as the neighbors, as new things come to light or new challenges come to light. But I want to tell you that one of the biggest challenges was 6 months into planning this, and I'm going to put something in chat. We started getting, nope, that didn't work. We started getting new businesses, and I was going to show this mural, but this new business moved in and started painting a big mural of a big white woman with blonde hair. And I'm driving across the street, and I'm like, my heart just sunk. And I called them and I was like, hello, what are you doing here? And he's like, oh, it's just art. It doesn't mean anything. I was like, no, it does mean something. And I had to go talk to him and explain, try to help him understand what he was doing and how it made people feel. And so I'm still trying to do it and it won't send. So let me try, if you'll let me indulge me to screen share one more time and see if I can do this. You're gonna have to go through my whole slideshow. Isn't this funny that you're recording it and this is going to be forever that people saw what I did here? So if anybody has a technical a way for this to not do it this way.
So I'm gonna vamp for a while
Right.
Joanna is
Can I say
finding that.
something in response to what Joanna just said, though? Joanna
Yes,
said?
yes, yes.
Which is, something I think a lot about as a Black person who's often the only one in the room sometimes in these hard conversations. And I'm also a theater director. And you mentioned just the power of vision. And vision gives you the freedom to fail because you're trying to achieve something you can't quite reach. And the reason I bring up being a theater director is I openly admit as a theater director, I can't do it alone. I've never been an actor, thank God. I'm not a playwright and I'm not a designer. I need collaborators. And I think vision allows you, it definitely, as someone who's I try not to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders, but don't we all, as arts leaders and artists, think about the weight of the world? And I think vision allows us to take that weight off our shoulders and say we're trying to achieve something bigger. So I just applaud the fact that you said you didn't know if it would work. You've never done it before, and something completely new and exciting came out of it. And I think it absolves us of the fear of thinking about race and diversity, as well as the opportunity of doing that. And it's definitely something I hold on to as a Black theater arts administrator.
That's awesome. Can you see this image now? So I'm driving across the street and this is 3 days before our big pre-enactment event. So, instead of a reenactment, we did a pre-enactment. We were acting out what ought to be. And my heart just sank because here we were elevating and sharing this amazing neighborhood history that was mostly African-American, and then this happens. And so I called him and he's like, I already had this permit approved by the city. I can't change the design. The artist was from out of town. They left, all these excuses. I didn't tell him he had to change it. I just said, this is what you need to know. This is how people feel. And the next day it looked like this. Now he wasn't allowed to change the design, but he darkened it. And the name of the restaurant is Greeks. So you're kind of like, is that a Greek person? I'm not really sure. But then the next year he built an addition and this is what he added. And so, and he has been so gracious in sharing with lots of other business people what he learned. And I was interviewed, Erica Smith used to be a reporter here in Indy. And anyway, she's in California. She did a story on public art and interviewed me. And he was willing to talk about this, which was just amazing because his heart turned from being, he just didn't know, nobody had taken the time to tell him and he didn't think, we asked him how could he pre-enact himself? How could he change his business plan himself? How could he love his neighbors through his business? And this is what he did. So
I'd like to bring a little bit of a discussion that's happening a little bit in the Q&A to this discussion. We can't change systems unless someone, the people with power, cede power to the people who don't have it or who have less. So what does that look like as an arts organization? Can you share some examples where you have as an organization ceded power to audiences that you hope to attract?
I mean, one of the most profound experiences of my career, and however long God lets me live, I don't think I'll top it. While at City Theater in Pittsburgh, we produced and I directed a production of Dominique Morisseau's Pipeline, a play essentially about a Black mother and her fear of the way the world might view and does view her Black son as a monster far more than a human. And along with the great now Associate Artistic Director, Claire Drobot, who is brilliant, and our then Education Director, Kristen Link, who is also brilliant, the three of us partnered together to really empower Black women in the Pittsburgh community from all walks of life, from theater artists and writers and actors to lawyers, to mayor of Wilkinsburg, to nonprofit leaders, all kinds of Black women, mothers and not, and gave them the stage and said, you should be the ones that guide our audience in how we think about this play and a talk back. or a conversation. And from the minute the show started, there was no white person on stage saying, welcome, you are here. There was always a sense of the for us, by us, with us. The with was really in practice. It wasn't work made by a predominantly white institution for a Black audience and just about a Black audience, or even by a Black audience or Black artist. It was made with. And the experience of, I'm always interested in work that reaches beyond the political to the personal and finds the bridge between the two. That special gap between the two is the work that excites me. And I've never seen it more in practice than a woman coming from work in her own life experience, experiencing a piece of art written by a Black woman, directed with that Black woman as the primary audience member in mind. And then she's the one who gets to say what it meant. Those gestures, I think, while that may feel small, who takes up space? Who holds the microphone? Who says hello? Who does the welcoming? How do we give voice to people without barriers or without limits? It's been a grounding moment for my career. I think about it almost every day as I think about producing and directing and the intersection of the two.
I hope some of you who are listening right now, who are in Indianapolis, had a chance to see Pipeline when it was here at the IRT last year. And I was very honored to lead a talk back afterwards with 2 other Black women. So we had a similar experience right here in Indianapolis. Dr. Venable, do you want to get in here? How does the IMA seed power to people who don't traditionally have it?
And please call me Charles.
Charles.
So one of the things that leaps to my mind is a project we're doing right now with Dr. Kelly Morgan, who is a curator. She's been on our staff about 2 years. She now leads all of our American art department.
She is fabulous.
She is fabulous. She's really great, very dynamic. And also, just as a comment, the number of curators of color in any art museum in the country is small, unless it's a very specialized, say, African-American museum of art. And so one really does often have to go outside your normal network, your normal channel, to find those jewel-like people who can really help change the narrative by bringing into the heart of an institution with long history, pretty much cloaked in whiteness through the art that's been collected. And it might not be been made by white people, but it was collected by white people in a certain way that was all based on cultural heritage and usually exploitation and conquering, et cetera, et cetera. And so Kelly has been that agent of change. And it was very specific on my point, not to do what a lot of museums have done, which is hire a curator of African-American art, which to me is like building a little box. If you want to call it a ghetto, you can, and putting some very smart, dynamic person and say, these are the things you get to play with. As opposed to, you got all of American art with all of its good stuff and its bad stuff, and the things that we don't have, we should go out and figure out how to get or borrow or buy. And we are working on, we've raised the funding for it, and she's working on a big project called See the People, Redefining American Art. So it's not a small little, let's hang up a couple of great paintings by, in this case, African-American artists or Latinas or whatever type of person you want to be talking about. But it's really taking on the dirty laundry that is everywhere in the history of the United States and certainly shows up in art museums. And so she will be talking about lynching in Indiana. She will be talking about a lot of beautiful things that many people from a certain cultural perspective think, oh, that is a gorgeous, whatever, sugar bowl made of silver in 1790 by the English. But she will be interpreting those things. And to get really to your question too about the community, she's spending 2.5 years talking to people in our community, trying to bring in opinions. What do you want to know about this? Did you know that sugar is one of the most oppressive substances in the history of the planet? And it resulted in lots of beautiful things sitting around in fancy art museums like ours. But generally, it's interpreted as this luxury commodity for white people, which it in many ways was. but built on the back of people of color, literally slaving away on work, on what, you know, one would call plantations, but they're really slave camps. And so it will be fascinating to see here in the heart of Indiana how those installations are interpreted by all the people who are going to see them. They will be quite different, but I'm really pleased that she very quickly in her first year or so here was able to root herself in the community in a dramatic way that's really helped us look at things differently internally. And I think it'll help our core audience and our hopefully new audiences look at things differently as well.
I am so glad that you brought up Kelly Morgan, and I'm interested in how organizations support artists, curators, performers who may come from marginalized communities in creating work and things that are not filtered through the mainstream gaze. I know as a writer that it feels very different to write a piece for us, for Black women, than it does to have to write a piece that is for consumption by all. And whether or not I have to interpret things that I don't feel like I should have to interpret. So how do you support, you know, curators, performers, artists, and being able to use their authentic voices on your stages, in your galleries, in those spaces?
I think one of the most moving things that I see happening as our American theater, and particularly NNPN, really leans into real equity, diversity, and inclusion work, which means it leaves the table and actually gets into action. Strategic plans are fun, but no one does them. So I love that NNPN, led by this great staff, is putting things into action. One of the biggest things that we all can do is ask and not assume. And it's hard because that directly confronts the nonprofit theater model, which is all based on budgets, rooted in assumptions and models that are systematically designed to keep people in and out. You know, we're still operating under subscriber models, plus group sales, plus young people night, plus like we're putting new tablecloths on a broken table because breaking apart the table is too hard. Or requires a real shift that's a little uncomfortable. And I think one of those things, in that part of that budgeting process, you know, we're picking plays a year out. We're making assumptions of who's gonna come see it a year out. We do so much assuming in the American theater that we don't have time to ask. Because if we get a different answer than what we assume, suddenly the budget's out of alignment with our values and our vision and our practice. And that's a lot of rework. And I've got to go to this other thing I've got to do. You know, we don't want to sometimes actually do the hard work of what you're speaking to. And it's a challenge I have to ask myself because, you know, no one's a monolith. I can't assume what the guest Black director needs or wants in order to have the best rehearsal process. What I can do in my practice as a producer is ask as soon as possible and be truly ready to respond. You know, not to be a well-intentioned any kind of person with an asterisk of, welcome, you got to stay in this box, you have this much money to spend, but truly, what do you need? A quick story because it highlights the brilliance of NNPN's Collaboration Fund. And again, my great colleagues at City Theater, we produced the world premiere of Isaac Gomez's Perk Up, Perk Up. And Isaac, right up front, he's a Hispanic writer writing a play about a hate crime, or a Latinx writer, excuse me, right away said, I want to build, if the dream is, we would have EDI consultants in the room. Now, the budget has no room for that, but we as a staff were committed to figuring out how to change our assumptions, to not just go, the budget is this. And we were able to, with the support of NNPN and forward-thinking organization like this, use collaboration funds to hire EDI advocates to live out that playwright's dream, to actually ask that writer of color what you need in order to do your best work, and then truly be ready to deliver. And I just applaud NNPN and the South City Theater for that kind of thinking, and I try to model that in my own work going forward.
Joanna, it seems like you were trying to get in there.
I think that the interesting thing about the Harrison Center is that we've tended to have we have a brand, right? And we have a brand that's been kind of Art 101, not too controversial. Let people that don't like art decide they do like art. And then once they get comfortable with art here, then we send them on to our partner organizations that take people a little bit deeper and deal with harder issues. But it's been so interesting to watch Indianapolis change, because what we couldn't do 19 years ago or even 10 years ago, we can have much deeper conversations now. And so sometimes I have to remember that that our brand, that brand we always talked about actually has matured, and people can handle and need to hear more challenging things. So that's part of it. The other part of it is most of the artists we're working with are trying to sell art for a living. That's what most of them are full-time artists. And I'm not going to tell them, do a really edgy show that's not going to sell, because it'll be a great conversation for the community. We don't give them stipends to show work. They get the show for free, and then they get to keep the money. So that's kind of how our model works. So we have to make sure, number one, that we're a safe place, and that if an artist wants to do that, that they can do that and they won't feel attacked. They'll feel supported. And I think that we have to make sure we're being better listeners and allowing that conversation to happen, because our old brand of being Art 101 may still be confusing some of our current artists. Does that make sense? I need to make sure everybody understands that this is a safe place for those conversations. We tend to be, the artists that are in this building, we don't just work with artists in this building, but the artists in this building, they all get along. They're all very chill. There's not a lot of drama. When you work in theater, oh my goodness. My 3 years of doing pre-enactment theater, I'm like, what is going on? This is so different than the visual arts community. So anyway, so we have to grow there is what I'm saying. And I want to grow there. And we were just talking as a staff last week about how we've been listening more, but do our artists know that means they can speak more?
I'd like to add that, I totally agree with everything that's been said. That struggle between budget and where does the money come from? And it's a little different in other states. I mean, in Indianapolis, there's virtually no funding for the arts, very small amounts. But as a country, we fund our arts no matter whether you're trying to produce a play or an art exhibition or put a ballet on at such poor levels that there was a crisis. There's been a crisis almost forever in the United States about where does the next dollar come from? And so that struggle between what's driving your program that will get a certain amount of your core audience in, and where can you really push the envelope in order to try to change that core audience by getting more non-core to become part of your support base, is certainly something that we all as arts leaders struggle with every day, I'm sure. On the inside of the Indianapolis Museum of Art in Newfields, we've worked for the last 7 years really to dismantle the system by which, if you are a curator, you can totally control programming because you're the only one. I mean, a director could say, no, you're not going to do that, or be supportive or not. But a curator can say, this is what I want to do. This is my personal vision. This is what I want to present for the good of the public. We've really come up with, actually we call it a core team. It will have a curator on it who's in charge of a project, but they have partners who are much more diverse often in terms of not just color, but in terms of, women versus men, people who are gay, people who are straight, all kinds of different people with different viewpoints. And just to give you a sense of the range of things we do now try to accomplish is on the more conservative side, we have a Edward Hopper exhibition that we hope will be opening July, because we hope we will be opening in July. We own one of the world's greatest paintings by Edward Hopper called Hotel Lobby. The point of the show is to really show his experience and his love affair with these weird isolated spaces that he often found in hotels. Interesting that we're all isolated right now, so all of a sudden he's trending unbelievably on social media. But when our team, we didn't want to just show, frankly, a great artist, but a white male's perspective along with his wife's perspective of their trooping through the United States and him painting certain kind of paintings. And so that rather traditional show now has an entire section on it, which has been crowdsourced to some degree about what it was like during the exact same time period from the 20s, 30s, and 40s and the early 50s, what it was like if you were a person of color traveling in the United States trying to get a hotel room. And those stories were gleaned from community members here in the city. And so you can hear voices talking about, we went on a family vacation, but we couldn't stay at this hotel and this hotel and this hotel, whereas Mr. Hopper could stay at almost any hotel he wanted to. We also had staff members who said, well, I've heard my grandmother, who was a single woman during that time period, tell us as kids that she could never get a hotel room because she didn't have a man with her. So there's a whole section too about the feminist view of what it was like to travel. So that's more, I would say more than tweaking, but it's not completely rearranging the core concept of having an Edward Hopper show that focuses on hotels. The other end of that is getting off campus. An example of that and doing something that I would say is much more to the point is we did a community meal with Situ Jones, the artist who's in Michigan, and does, if you know his work, it's sort of performance art that brings the community together. We did that as the opening of our Harvest Festival last year, but we didn't want to do it on our campus. We wanted to do it where it would be much more symbolic and powerful to generate conversations between neighbors. And so we did it on what was, and in many ways still is symbolically, one of the worst red lines in the United States that separated neighborhoods. So we did this in Indianapolis, it's 38th Street, which cuts straight through the city. To the south of that, it's a predominantly Black neighborhood and has been for a very long time. And to the north of that red line, it was a white neighborhood and predominantly still is. So he created a long 300-foot table. He then reached out to a lot of other community artists, and we came together to share around this community table and had artists from that community making all the parts of the sort of set for that, if you will, and then talked about the impact of redlining in that neighborhood, which is our neighborhood. Literally, the freeway also cut straight through that neighborhood, which happened to community of color all across the United States from the 1940s and 50s and 60s. And so that also shows when we have more control, we're trying to do things that are much more, embrace much more different viewpoints than we would have traditionally been doing 10 years ago.
You know, in the last few comments, the idea of budget and money came up a few times. And is there, you know what, there is a tension. There is a tension in getting, you know, the funding that organizations need to survive, and doing things that are different. We know very often boards look the way they look because people want to bring people to the table who have power and money. And we know who doesn't have power and money. But if it continues to look that way, you know, it's a vicious circle. And as a funder, this is a question I want to know: how often does the idea of getting money to do your work prevent you from doing the things you need to do it differently and get your deep and broad and wide and diverse audience? And how do you navigate the tension between those things? Between what funders want and fund holders and donors want and the people you need on the board and the people you need to do different innovative work?
Well, if I can, I'd just like to say we certainly have that issue, and I don't know of an art museum in America that doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly we have people of color on our board who do have power and do have money, but they're also the same people who are asked to be on 5,000 boards. You know, so they're like board exhausted all the time. And so they can be and should be extremely selective about what boards they choose to serve on. We've worked hard too about trying to improve that system, but also sidestep that system. And that's because we don't get any funding of significance from a government source. We do have an endowment, but it's not anywhere near enough to cover a 152-acre complex with 17 buildings on it. So we actually have been focusing on a lot of programming, which by its very design is meant to earn revenue by selling tickets. And we also know that if we do traditional museum programming, for the most part, it's not highly attended and we don't sell very many tickets to it, no matter whether you're white, black, green, or pink. So we've worked on these seasonal festivals that are much more, well, our Winter Lights program, because we have a big garden. We've actually designed a festival that starts right before Thanksgiving and ends the first week of January. It's about tradition, food, and having a really wonderful time outside when it's very dark. We get very dark early in the winter because of the part of the Eastern time zone that we're in. And we have found that which doesn't have a single, black work of art or Asian work of art or Caucasian work of art in it, being outside with your family now draws almost 130,000 people. And it is the most diverse program we have because it appeals to almost everybody. And it's going back to the comment that you made, Reginald, about it's not about money. People have money to buy tickets. They just may not find that program interesting or you're not welcoming to them. We have found that program to be a big welcome mat for a lot of people. We now have about 25% of the people who come to that program have never stepped foot on our campus ever, even though they all live in Indianapolis.
I'm curious why you should add some. You said there's no black art at that festival though.
Well, it's a botanical garden festival outside at
I
night.
see. But maybe there could be, see now I'm going to become your producer. So
You're clearly a good one.
Get a black band, get a Latinx band. Where are the partners? Going to be the Latinx food. If they're there, maybe that's a way to
that sounds like our harvest. That sounds like our fall festival, actually.
I gotta go visit all these festivals. I don't know.
I have something to add. So remember how I said our brand matured over the years?
Mm-hmm.
I would say that our brand now we're known for being very inclusive. That's part of our brand. And so we don't actually have separate outreach programs. Inclusion is integrated in all of our programs. I think that if I had separate outreach programs, well, first of all, we're a small organization. Charles is a huge organization. We have we reach 90,000 people a year, right? So that's a much, much smaller footprint, and we're very have a strong neighborhood relationship. So I think that somebody told me personally a long time ago, don't start new things, include people in what you're already doing. So I started, I porch every Sunday. So inviting people that aren't like me to porch with me. And it sounds crazy, but back in the day when I had kids and was going to the grocery store as more than I am now, I would invite people who weren't like me to go to the grocery store with me. And it's amazing how easy it is to just kind of invite someone to come along with what you're already doing. And so that's kind of the same thing we've approached here at the Harrison Center, including people with what we're already doing. And so I think that our funders probably don't view us as having two different kinds of programs.
So I want to begin to open up for questions from the audience. So please, if you have questions, please send them my way. And I have one now, and I apologize, I may mispronounce this name, Brishen Miller, who wants to know, Reginald argued that not all people of color are impoverished, and this is true, myself included, but the middle class people of color in my community do not go to theater unless they also work in the theater. How do we change that, Reginald?
I'm glad all the answers. But I will say this, and I'm very specific too, and this is like self-policing, is thinking of monolith language. And so I can't speak for all middle class Black people, like, or, you know, or whatever class I'm in, depending on just how long this pandemic exists in the American theater. I don't have an answer for why people in your community, and I don't know what community that is. What I would say though is, I think Dr. Charles, no doctor, said earlier, you know, sometimes it's just people don't want to see your play. And I think too often we think we're perfect and amazing, and like, I didn't direct it, so it couldn't have been that good. But you know, I think so often like we act as if we are so perfect and everything we're doing is so right, which again comes back to the listening and the admitting failure. You know, I don't know why every audience member doesn't come see everything. What I do know is something about the Christmas Carol works, and I don't just think it's Tiny Tim. Something about that festival that you mentioned, Charles, is working, and I don't just think it's over outside. You can go outside anywhere. I think we need to start thinking about what's really working and actually start shifting budgets and priorities, and that's uncomfortable because at almost every arts organization, the people who are in some complicated way, now you think about this, it's a Friday now, people often doing the most work are often the least paid, which means they are the least valued and least valuable. And so, you know, where are the priorities? Where is the marketing budget? I always look at marketing budgets. Where are you putting the money? So often it's not going into the show that that's failing. And we go, why didn't they come? Well, you didn't have any money for the postcard. We didn't mail a postcard, so we didn't even try to see if they would come. You know, I think we get so caught up in, we did this once, and so it didn't happen, and so let's do the same thing, you know, or we get into the Einstein cycle of insanity. You know, and I really encourage us, again, it's something Joanna said about vision and trying new things, but lean on our ability as administrators to balance, to meet the art in the administrative minds in the middle as opposed to separate the aisles. Get creative about your administration. I find it makes the job of budgeting, it's my favorite part of my job. I get to control who gets paid what and where and when. And that, I mean, that's equity. You know, for me, is I get to put money in the hands of artists and raise their rate. You know, that's the way I think this really comes back to how are we reaching those audiences and what are we trying to give them?
I think it also goes back to building authentic relationships, because I think very often, you know, you can't not talk to a population all year long, not by advertising on the radio stations or television. Never include them in your space, and then once a year do a play that's directed at the Latinx community, and then say, why didn't anybody come? That doesn't work, and we're done.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of, you know, if you're my friend, you need to be my friend all year long and include me and listen to me all year long. And I think sometimes that's missing in arts and culture, because diversity is a thing you do a few different times a year instead of inclusion all year.
The power of the word values. If it's a value, it's different than it's something we do. You know, we've got to commit we are, you know, as Pearl Cleage and Toni Morrison say, we use language. That's what we do to combat war. So let's use our language wisely. If it's a value, then we are failing to not do it all year long, and we should be feeling so bad about ourselves that we can't go forward until we fix it. That's where our values lie. You know, and I believe that strongly, again, as often as a person of color who's the only one in the room. I feel grateful to have worked at places that have a foundation where I can call us out, I have a litmus test that I can use when we get to those kind of tricky points.
I do think, Tamara, it's also worth reminding all of us, because it's true, as Reginald said, we often think we're sort of perfect organizations with brilliant people, and that's that. I mean, not that we're perfect organizations. We do have a lot of brilliant people who work in the arts, whether it's plays or museums or arts high schools. But the vast majority of Americans of any color, of any background, do not go to plays. in the traditional sense of like going to the theater. They do not go to operas. They don't go to museums. It's a minority of all of us who make up the audiences for everything we're talking about. And so figuring out how to crack the code with the next group of folks who would say, well, I don't have anything against going to the play, but I might have these 5 options. And tonight I'm going with a group of friends, and most of them I know don't want to go to a play. So we're going to go to a bar instead. They're more motivated to do those kind of things. And we did a frankly exhaustive audience survey, not audience survey, because I would assume they were our audience, but of the entire population of Indianapolis. And we found 15% of people who said, literally, this wasn't the question, but they don't like art and they don't like nature, and they're not coming to a place that's mission says art and nature in it. They're never doing it. So spending our marketing dollars and all of that, trying to get those people to be our audience is not a good use of money, I would argue, as opposed to those people in the middle, which tend to be, they're statistically middle class in terms of finance. They're as diverse as America is. In Indianapolis, that's 56% of the population. And they do say, well, under the right circumstances, I'll go to the art museum. I have nothing against that. And which is why we ended up doing things with food, because that was so much higher on their list than it was to participate with their friends in food-based things than ever art was. And so we're building a bar in the middle of the museum. We do pop-up food shops in places we traditionally would never have put food because of all of our perfect rules about you can't have food or drink anywhere near a work of art, which is not the way people live. It's not the way that work of art was ever made. They were all meant to be in houses or churches or somewhere. And so we're trying to really figure out how to meet people where they are with what they like to do, but do it within our mission of bringing art and nature to people. And it does break a lot of rules, and there's been a lot of pain and upset people on my staff and a few on the board, and some people have gone on to other places because they didn't want to work in what they thought our future was going to be.
Here's another question from Pete Miller. Should we be looking at a new metric of trying to find producing models that put a greater percentage of their total cost into people rather than stuff?
I think we're being forced to in this moment. And it's scary. I am clearly like a rabble rouser, but I'm a rabble rouser that was trained and spent my whole life in the American Regional Theater and off-Broadway models. Like since I was a kid, like this is all I've known as an artist director and a managing director. And I've been so ingrained in a system that's quite broken. Pre-COVID, in terms of how the system was not designed to think about power in the way that we're challenging it to do already. And now post-COVID, or in the middle of COVID, dreaming of the post, if we'll ever have a post, like we are being forced to think about all the money we've put into buildings. I mean, the American theater is going shoulda, coulda, woulda, there's so much money spent on capital campaigns that don't include artistic excellence funds, capital campaigns that don't include staff, don't include marketing. There's buildings, and I think we've been forced to think about what happens if there's no building? Who are you now? Where do the values lie? And that's, like you're right, Charles, it's hard work. But something I tell students a lot is that as a director, the best thing you can do is remain curious. And I think I always tell my students to direct your career, not just the rehearsal room. If we're really directing our organizations, we keep our organizations curious, which means a lot of asking questions and a lot of listening to answers that we might not want to hear. And if we remain closed door boardrooms, we don't become curious if we read the same plays like this. If we don't actually search for new things and get excited about what's happening down the street, we so often don't get curious about the institutions we're directing the way we do about the art. And as someone who's, again, my art feeds my arts administrator, they are one and the same. I try to hold myself curious about new models, curious about the what ifs, And we're being forced in a really scary way, hard way to think about a big new what if. What if we can't gather in the building the way we thought we would when we made that budget? What do we do now?
Charles?
I was just, and couldn't agree more. And we are in a crucible right now. I mean, under the, you know, to use a play analogy, but we are there in the fire, and Lord knows what amalgam is going to come out of all of this. No doubt there will be some organizations that do not survive. Even big ones that you would think are, you know, there for the ages are faltering because we built an unsustainable system that is so rooted, as you just said, Reginald, in bricks and mortar.
And not people, because the
And
thing
not
is,
people.
a lot of us are all facing furloughs and layoffs.
And that's what I was going to say. What is the first thing to get cut? It's going to be staff, and it already is being staff. I'm right now, you know, we prioritize hanging on to our very creative staff until somebody just walks in the door and says we're going bankrupt and you're going to have to get rid of, close the whole place. I mean, I'm being dramatic because we're with a bunch of dramatists, and I think I can do that here. But it's really like, you know, we just gave a bonus today. I've been closed for 3 months because we would have made our goals for this year. We have a bonus system for every staff, whether you're sweeping floors or you're a curator. And it's not their fault that our attendance missed our goal by 18,000 people because we've been closed. And so we decided we were just going to roll the dice a little further. And we gave away a significant amount of money today to our staff because they need us right now. And not everybody can do that, but we could and we should. Now that may mean someday I lay off more people if it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. But I can't live there because my people need us now. And we'll just have to see how it all works out. But I agree, we're so bricks and mortar heavy in the arts industries across the country that might, it's already coming back to haunt us and has been for now, slowly, probably 20 years.
I want to ask a last question of each of you, and that is, what do you need? All three of you are leaders in your organizations. You know, in order to do this work of equity in the way you would want to do it, if all the bumpers were taken off and you had all the money and all the people and you had everything exactly as you wanted, what would that be? What do you need to do this work? Joanna?
So it's interesting, as you were talking about the challenges of COVID, and I was thinking about the constraints that we've had, and I was thinking about how I said to my artists, I need you more than ever. And we, you know, raised money to pay their studio rents for 2 months, and we raised money to commission them for work, and we found other ways for them to create income because I need artists more than ever. And out of keeping my artists and their creativity, we came up with all kinds of amazing ways of serving people during COVID. And like we've been more effective during COVID than pre-COVID, which is crazy. So my answer to you, and I've never thought of this before, but my answer to you might be this: we need artists more than ever. Maybe we should go to the artists and say, how do we get to equity? Maybe instead of, you know, the executives up in the room talking about how do we, you know, whatever, maybe I go to my artists and say, how can the Harrison Center be more equitable? Where are my blind spots? And maybe they can do what they did with COVID and help the Harrison Center become much more effective in reaching the community, which is going to help us for the future, right? All the things that we've learned. So maybe this is what I learned from this conference, to go to my artists, so thank you.
And I would just piggyback on that. I mean, clearly we're in the art business and we love artists, but we, you know, I'll just go back to, will there be a future for a lot of organizations if you don't have an audience? You know, it won't make any difference if I have a $250 million Van Gogh painting hanging in my gallery. If there's nobody there who cares or is there to see it, what's the point of doing that and continuing to build huge buildings? Our core audience across the country, for the most part, is graying, you know, eventually you have to replace those people. So I would say we have to get much more effective, and probably COVID means we needed to do it 100 years ago, but we certainly need to do it faster, as fast as we can. We need to love our communities more. We need to talk to our communities and ask them what they want us to be, and be very serious about taking their advice.
What do I need? I think, and I said it, you know, been a week, it's been a life, but it's definitely been a week. And I am interested, and I think Lisa, I hope Lisa and Carol, who led NNPN and our strategic plan, are with us. We're in the business of justice now. And so I need justice, which makes EDI work not an option. So I think once we shift our paradigm and shift our perspective, suddenly all those budget assumptions go right away. And all the can't do's go right away if you realize we're in the business of justice, which is life or death. And I can't separate the reality that my life is life or death. I say at the beginning of most first rehearsals, in a world that wants me dead, I am here to direct a story that celebrates life. I am going to acknowledge the reality of the world I live in the unique opportunity that I have, the power of imagination and creativity in the sacred space of theater to imagine something that celebrates and uplifts me in a country that often does not. I'm in the business of justice, whether that's a musical comedy or Dominique Marisa and August Wilson. I'm in the business of justice now. And I need people to get on the side of, get some allies, some real allies doing the real work of trying to deeply change communities forever, not for a season.
That is a perfect word to end on. And I would like to end on this. This is a very difficult time. I think one thing I am hoping that everyone is learning from this pandemic is that the vulnerability and the fear that so many are now feeling, there are people who feel that every day and are the most hurt the most by the situation we are in. Breonna Taylor and Gregory Floyd died over the last week or so. Christian Cooper was put in danger of dying. Last week, we lost Larry Kramer, who's a very important activist. It's just been a rough week, and I'd love to end this by taking just a moment of silence for the lives that we lost and the struggle that we're enduring. So if everyone would join me for a moment and taking a moment of silence. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was great to meet you all.
Hi, guys.
You.
It's Nan. I just, I'm lifted in a way that feels so powerful right now. I want to thank you all so much for your time today, Charles and Joanna, Reg, and Tamara, and to all of you who joined us for this session or any of the sessions over the last week. I cannot thank you enough. I know that you have been challenged and inspired, and I know that in this Zoom room, in the Zoomiverse of NNPN, there are people that are going to lead us over that bridge to our next phase. And I am so thankful to be a part of it and so grateful that you've been with us today. Remember, please, those of you who will join us, you'll get your playbills at 7, and at 8 o'clock we'll open the doors for the Affiliated Artists Playwright Slam. I can't think of a better way to end this week than to go back to our artists. As Joanna said, the things that we need, we'll go back to our artists and let them help us celebrate and grieve and move forward in this world. So thank you again on behalf of the Board of Directors of NNPN of our 125 member theaters, staff and artists, our ambassadors and our affiliated artists. And again, a huge thank you to the NNPN staff for making this all possible. Jordana, Jess, Rose, couldn't have done it without you. This is what an amazing experience. Thank you again. We'll see 3 of you, hopefully 4 of you, including you, Rich, in Indianapolis next year, but we'll see the rest of you tonight. Thank you again.
Thank you.